Chapter 1. The Gold-Plated Cage of Westbridge Estates. The air in Westbridge Estates always smelled of manicured lawns, expensive imported mulch, and the quiet, crushing weight of generational wealth. It was a gated community nestled in the foothills just outside of Atlanta, where the houses didn't just cost millions, they commanded respect. Or at least, that's what Arthur Pendleton liked to tell himself every single morning as he stood on his heated Italian marble front porch, sipping a double-shot espresso out of a bone china cup. Arthur was, by all accounts that mattered to him, a pillar of Westbridge Estates. He was the chairman of the Neighborhood Architectural Review Board, a retired corporate tax attorney whose blood ran the color of greenbacks, and a man who believed that the world could be neatly divided into two categories: people who belonged in Westbridge, and people who had mistakenly taken a wrong turn off the interstate. At 58, Arthur's hair was a silver fox masterpiece, his posture military straight, and his gaze perpetually narrowed in search of an infraction. A stray blade of grass that dared to grow half an inch past the HOA limit? Arthur would log a complaint. A garbage bin left out an hour past the Tuesday morning deadline? Arthur was on the phone with property management before the bin could even hit the curb. He viewed himself as the self-appointed guardian of property values, the thin white and gold line protecting Westbridge from the chaotic, unrefined sprawl of the outside world. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early October. The leaves were just beginning to turn amber and gold, fluttering down onto the pristine asphalt of Oak Ridge Drive like confetti celebrating Arthur's immaculate neighborhood. Arthur stood at the edge of his driveway, wearing a pristine cream-colored cable-knit sweater draped over his shoulders and driving loafers without socks, watching the world spin on its proper axis. Then, reality tore at the seams. Down the street, moving with a rumble that rattled the very foundations of Arthur's carefully curated peace, came a vehicle that did not belong. It wasn't a Mercedes, a BMW, or even a modest Porsche Cayenne. It was a matte black custom-built Ford F-450 Super Duty Limited, lifted, riding on massive all-terrain tires, with tinted windows darker than a moonless night. It growled with the deep, throaty put of a twin-turbo diesel engine, kicking up a microscopic speck of dust that Arthur's soul immediately registered as an existential threat. Arthur's hand tightened around his bone china cup. His eyes bulged behind his rimless designer glasses. What in God's name is that monstrosity doing in Westridge? He thought, his jaw clenching so hard a molar ached. The truck slowed down, its turn signal clicking rhythmically, and turned into the driveway of Lot 42, the sprawling 3-acre estate directly across the street from Arthur. Lot 42 had been vacant for nearly a year. The previous owner, a hedge fund manager who had overextended himself during a bad market correction, had quietly foreclosed, leaving the monolithic French provincial mansion empty. Arthur had been eyeing Lot 42 for months, secretly hoping to buy it just to tear down the east wing and turn it into an extended private rose garden, thereby blocking anyone else from ever polluting his direct line of sight. Instead, the house had been sold last month. Sold quietly, without Arthur's direct consultation on the architectural board. A procedural oversight that had already given Arthur 3 nights of acid reflux. The deed had transferred through an anonymous Delaware LLC called Apex Horizon Holdings, a corporate veil that Arthur deeply distrusted. Corporations didn't play golf. Corporations didn't attend the annual wine tasting mixer. Corporations didn't care about the height of the hydrangeas. And now, out of this monstrous black truck, the new residents were emerging. Arthur watched, his chest heaving with righteous indignation, as the driver's side door swung open. A man stepped down. He was tall, athletic, perhaps in his mid-40s, wearing dark designer jeans, a simple black t-shirt that hugged a broad chest, and a pair of clean white sneakers. He had a shaved head, a neatly trimmed goatee peppered with silver, and an easy, relaxed posture that screamed of absolute, unbothered confidence. This was Marcus Sterling. Arthur didn't know his name yet, but he already hated the way Marcus closed the truck door with a solid, heavy thud, utterly indifferent to the pristine morning air. Before Arthur could even cross the street to demand answers, the passenger side door opened, and a woman stepped out. Dr. Maya Sterling. She wore an oversized emerald green sweater, stylish round glasses, and laugh lines crinkling around her eyes as she stretched her arms toward the autumn sky, taking a deep breath of the suburban air. Maya was a renowned neurosurgeon, a woman whose brilliance had graced the covers of medical journals, though Arthur had no way of knowing that. All he saw was a black woman standing in a driveway that belonged to a multi-million-dollar estate, tracking dirt onto the sacred soil of Westbridge Estates. And then the back doors opened, releasing a flurry of life and sound. First came a pair of teenage twins, a boy and a girl 16 years old, laughing loudly as they wrestled over a backpack. Jordan and Kayla. They were dressed in designer streetwear, their laughter ringing out across the quiet cul-de-sac like a declaration of war against Arthur's peace and quiet. Finally, a golden retriever puppy bounded out of the back seat, barking joyfully and immediately tripping over its own oversized paws before tumbling onto the pristine, emerald green lawn of Lot 42. Arthur's espresso cup nearly slipped from his fingers. An unleashed animal? On day one. This was beyond an infraction. This was a direct assault on civilization. Arthur slammed his china cup down onto the limestone ledge of his porch, too hard, causing a hairline crack to spiderweb across the rim, and marched down his driveway. He didn't walk. He strode with the furious, purposeful momentum of a man who believed the universe was custom-built to test his patience. "Excuse me," Arthur bellowed, his voice carrying across the street, sharp enough to cut glass. "Excuse me, you there." Marcus, who was busy unbuckling a large duffel bag from the truck bed, paused. He turned slowly, shading his eyes against the morning sun, and looked across the street. He saw a man in a cream sweater and loafers marching toward him with the facial expression of a man about to call the manager of the entire planet. Maya turned as well, her smile fading into a cool, guarded neutrality. The twins stopped wrestling, and the golden retriever puppy scrambled to its feet, tilting its head in confusion. Arthur crossed the street without waiting for the traffic, as if there was ever any traffic on Oak Ridge Drive, and planted himself firmly at the edge of the newly paved driveway of Lot 42, standing just inches from the property line, though safely outside it, adhering strictly to his own pedantic rules of engagement. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked. His voice was deep, smooth, and entirely devoid of the deference Arthur felt was his birthright. "I should say you can," Arthur snapped, puffing out his chest and adjusting his glasses down his nose to peer over them. "First of all, welcome to Westbridge Estates. Though how you managed to slip past the vetting process is a failure of property management that I intend to rectify by Monday morning. Second of all, your vehicle is an eyesore. It looks like something belonging to a construction contractor or a landscaping crew, not a resident of this community. We have strict covenants regarding commercial-grade vehicles parked in residential driveways." Marcus blinked. He looked down at his custom Ford F450, which had cost more than a brand-new BMW M3, then back up at Arthur. A tiny, amused smirk played at the corner of Marcus's mouth. "It's my truck," Marcus said mildly. "And it's a personal vehicle." "It's a nuisance," Arthur corrected sharply, raising a finger to punctuate his point. "And furthermore, your dog, if that chaotic creature can even be called a dog, is off-leash." Section 4, Paragraph B of the Westbridge Homeowners Association bylaws explicitly states that all domestic animals must be tethered or leashed at all times when outside the primary structure. You've been here precisely 4 minutes, and you're already in violation of 2 major ordinances. Maya stepped forward, closing the distance between her husband and the man who looked like an overgrown mall cop. Her expression was polite, but her eyes were ice. "Good morning," Maya said smoothly, her tone dripping with professional polish. "I'm Dr. Maya Sterling, and this is my husband, Marcus. We just drove in from Chicago. Forgive us if we haven't memorized the neighborhood rulebook before unloading our furniture." "It doesn't matter where you came from, madam," Arthur said, refusing to soften his tone, his eyes darting between Maya and Marcus with unconcealed disdain. "The rules apply equally to everyone. Westbridge Estates is a community of standards. We don't drop in from nowhere and turn our neighborhood into a chaotic parking lot. If you wanted a free-for-all, you should have bought a house in the city." The word city hung in the air, weighted with a subtext so thick you could slice it with a butter knife. Arthur didn't have to spell out what he meant. The dog whistles were practically foghorns. Marcus's easygoing demeanor shifted just a fraction. The amusement vanished from his eyes, replaced by a quiet, calculating stillness. The look of a man who had spent decades dealing with institutional gatekeepers and had learned how to dismantle them with a single sentence. But before Marcus could speak, Jordan, one of the twins, stepped up, his phone out. "Dad, is this guy seriously yelling at us about a dog?" Jordan muttered, loud enough for Arthur to hear. "Hey, watch your tone, young man," Arthur barked, turning his wrath toward the teenager. "Respect your elders and respect the neighborhood rules, or you'll find out very quickly that we don't tolerate delinquents here." Delinquents? The word dropped like a lead weight onto the driveway. Maya's jaw tightened. "Excuse me? Call my son a delinquent again?" "I call things as I see them," Arthur replied, doubling down with supreme, blinding arrogance. "Look at you all. Dragging in oversized trucks, letting animals run wild, talking back. This is a private, high-end development. People invest millions of dollars to live in peace and quiet, away from this kind of disregard for order." Marcus took a slow step forward, towering over Arthur by at least 4 inches. The sunlight glinted off the silver in his goatee as he looked down at the older man. "Let's get something straight, neighbor," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth. "You don't know who we are. You don't know how we got here. And you certainly don't get to come onto our property, or hover at the edge of it, and lecture my family like a petty tyrant." Arthur scoffed, throwing his hands up in disbelief. "Your property? We'll see how long you keep it when the HO slaps you with enough fines to force a foreclosure. I am Arthur Pendleton, chairman of the Architectural Review Board. I am the authority in this neighborhood." Marcus stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then slowly a grin spread across his face. Not a friendly grin, but the terrifying smile of an apex predator who had just realized his prey was wearing a neon sign. "Arthur Pendleton," Marcus repeated, tasting the name. "Chairman of the Architectural Review Board. Is that right?" "That's right." Arthur puffed out his chest, sensing victory. "And I suggest you drop the attitude, pack up that ridiculous truck, and go back to wherever you crawled out of before I call the police and have you cited for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Marcus let out a short, dry laugh. He pulled his smartphone out of his pocket, tapped the screen once, and looked up at Arthur with eyes that felt like chipped granite. "Go ahead, Arthur," Marcus murmured softly. "Call the police. Tell them someone's ruining your morning. Because while you're standing there hyperventilating over a golden retriever, I think you should know something." Arthur frowned, suddenly uneasy despite himself. "Know what?" "I own the development," Marcus said casually. "Every single acre. Every single street lamp. Every single brick of the clubhouse. And yes, Arthur, I own the house you're standing across the street from, too." Arthur stared at him. Then, he threw his head back and let out a loud, braying laugh. "You? Own Westbridge Estates? Oh, that's rich. Do you have any idea how much capital this development represents? Do you have any idea who the primary stakeholder is? You drive a truck that looks like a rolling billboard." Marcus didn't blink. He simply unlocked his phone, held it out toward Arthur, and showed him a digital document bearing the signature of the state's chief corporate registrar, alongside the title deed to all 450 acres of Westbridge Estates, registered entirely under Apex Horizon Holdings LLC, with Marcus Sterling listed as the sole, 100% managing member. Arthur's laughter died in his throat. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly painted ghost in his cream-colored sweater. "Now," Marcus said, stepping off his driveway and walking toward the street, closing the distance between them until Arthur was forced to take a nervous step backward. "You were saying something about calling the police, Arthur? Guys, if you won't, I think I'll make the call myself." Chapter 2. The Sound of Falling Kingdoms. The digital document glowing on Marcus Sterling's phone screen seemed to project a physical weight across the sun-drenched asphalt of Oak Ridge Drive. For a man who had spent 3 decades measuring his self-worth in square footage, subdivision bylaws, and the deferential nods of local contractors, Arthur Pendleton felt his entire reality tilt on its axis. His mouth opened. No words came out. His tongue felt like a dry piece of toast scraping against the roof of his mouth. That's a fake," Arthur finally managed, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched desperation that shattered the remnants of his silver fox dignity. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the screen. "Anybody can mock up a PDF on a smartphone. You You probably downloaded a template from the internet to try and intimidate me. Marcus didn't blink. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked profoundly bored, like a man dealing with a toddler who insisted that the moon was made of green cheese. With a flick of his thumb, Marcus swiped to a second document, a certified bank transfer confirmation, followed by the original closing escrow papers stamped and sealed by the Fulton County Superior Court just 3 weeks prior. "You're welcome to call county records yourself, Arthur," Marcus said smoothly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Or better yet, you can call the property management firm, Sterling and Associates. Wait, let me guess. You never actually looked at who bought the management firm last year when the old partners retired, did you?" Arthur's breath hitched. Sterling and Associates? The management company that handled Westbridge Estates, the very firm that sent out quarterly maintenance invoices and collected the community's multi-million-dollar reserve fund, had been bought out by an anonymous corporate buyer 12 months ago. The neighborhood had barely noticed the transition because the day-to-day staff remained the same. But the ultimate boss, the man whose signature authorized every lien, every architectural exception, and every vendor contract, Arthur felt a cold drop of sweat trickle down his spine, soaking directly into the collar of his expensive cable-knit sweater. "You," Arthur whispered, the word tasting like ash. "You bought the management company too." "Bought it, restructured it, and streamlined it," Marcus said, taking another step forward. Now he was standing directly on the center line of the road, invading Arthur's airspace with terrifying, polite authority. "Which means, technically speaking, Arthur, your seat on the Architectural Review Board isn't just an elected community position anymore. It's an at-will appointment under my corporate umbrella. And right now, your performance review is looking a bit rocky." Dr. Maya Sterling walked up beside her husband, her arms crossed over her emerald green sweater, looking across the street at Arthur's pristine, manicured lawn with the critical eye of a general surveying a conquered province. "You know, honey," Maya said, her voice dripping with lethal sweetness, "the hydrangeas by his front porch look a bit overgrown. Don't you think they violate Section 9 of the Neighborhood Aesthetic Guidelines? A bit too chaotic. Unrefined, even." Arthur bristled, a strangled sound escaping his throat. "My hydrangeas have won the Westbridge Garden Club Award 3 years in a row. Past performance doesn't guarantee future compliance," Maya replied smoothly, adjusting her glasses. "Maybe we should have property management issue a fine. Say $500 a day until they're trimmed to standard." "You can't do that," Arthur shrieked, finally snapping. All the polite facade of the retired corporate tax attorney dissolved, leaving only a sputtering, panicked middle-aged man in driving loafers. "I have rights. I'm a property owner. I've lived here since this development was farmland. You can't just come in here and rewrite the rules because you. He stopped himself just short of saying what was burning on his tongue, but the ugly, toxic implication hung heavy in the damp morning air. Marcus's eyes narrowed into twin slits of liquid ice. The easygoing charm vanished completely, replaced by the crushing gravity of a man who had climbed to the absolute peak of the corporate world through sheer intelligence and unyielding dominance. "Because of what, Arthur?" Marcus asked softly, stepping so close that Arthur could smell the faint hint of mint and coffee on his breath. "Because we don't fit your aesthetic? Because you assume the people who built this neighborhood, the people who own the deeds, the capital, and the infrastructure must look like you? Let's get one thing crystal clear, Arthur. I didn't come to Westbridge to play your little suburban HOA dictator games. I came here because my wife wanted a quiet house with a big yard for our kids and our dog, and because I happen to like investing in real estate in areas with high appreciation potential." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, resonant rumble. "But if you ever raise your voice to my family again, or come onto my property, or call my children delinquents, I won't just fine you. I will buy your house out from under your mortgage, evict you by sundown, and turn your precious heated marble porch into a public dog park." Arthur's knees actually buckled slightly. The threat wasn't an empty one. Looking at Marcus, Arthur knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that this man had the financial firepower to do precisely that before lunch. Across the street, Jordan and Kayla had stopped unloading the truck. They were watching the confrontation with amused grins, while the golden retriever puppy trotted back over to Maya, panting happily and dropping a slobbery tennis ball at her feet. Down the block, A set of motorized gates at the main entrance of Westbridge Estates hummed as they slid open. A sleek black town car belonging to the neighborhood property manager, a nervous middle-aged man named Henderson, came cruising down Oakridge Drive on his usual Saturday morning rounds. Henderson spotted the group clustered in the middle of the street, Arthur looking like he was about to suffer a massive coronary, and Marcus standing over him like a statue of vengeance. Henderson hit the brakes, his car sliding slightly on the wet asphalt before parking haphazardly on the shoulder. The manager practically tumbled out of the vehicle, his tie flapping over his jacket as he jogged across the street, panting. "Mr. Sterling! Dr. Sterling!" Henderson babbled, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Good morning. Welcome to Westbridge. I see you've already met Mr. Pendleton." Arthur whipped his head around, latching onto the property manager like a drowning man grabbing a floating spar. "Henderson. Thank God. Tell this man who I am. Tell him about the board. Tell him he can't just threaten me on my own street." Henderson looked wildly between Arthur and Marcus, swallowing hard. He adjusted his collar, looking intensely uncomfortable. "Well, Arthur," Henderson muttered, staring fixedly at his own shoes. "Technically, Mr. Sterling isn't just a resident. He's the principal owner of Apex Horizon. He's essentially my boss. And your boss too." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds in the nearby oak trees seemed to stop singing. Arthur stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. The reality of his complete, utter irrelevance crashed down upon him. For 30 years, he had wielded the petty power of the HOA like a scepter, believing he was the king of Westbridge. But he had been nothing more than a tenant in a kingdom built and owned by the very people he had just tried to chase away. Marcus turned away from Arthur, dismissing him as completely as one might brush a speck of lint off a sleeve. He looked down at Maya, his expression softening instantly into warmth and affection. "Well, honey," Marcus said, smiling as he reached out to take her hand, "the neighbors seem lively. What do you say we get the rest of the boxes inside and fire up the grill?" "Sounds perfect," Maya said, giving Arthur one last, devastatingly dismissive glance. "Just make sure we check the property lines first. Wouldn't want any stray pests wandering onto our side of the fence." As the Sterling family turned and walked back toward Lot 42, laughing and calling the puppy to follow them, Henderson gave Arthur an awkward, apologetic pat on the shoulder. "Rough morning, Arthur," the manager whispered. Maybe take it easy on the HOA complaints for a while." Arthur stood alone in the middle of the street, the cold autumn wind blowing right through his expensive cable-knit sweater, staring at the matte black truck parked across the way. The gold-plated cage of Westbridge Estates hadn't been breached by outsiders. It had just been reclaimed by its true master. And for the first time in his life, Arthur Pendleton had no rules left to hide behind. Chapter 3. The Monday Morning Massacre. By Monday morning, the panic circulating through the upper echelons of Westbridge Estates had reached biblical proportions. Word had traveled faster than a wildfire through the neighborhood's private WhatsApp groups and encrypted country club threads. Arthur Pendleton had spent the entire weekend barricaded inside his home, drawing the heavy velvet drapes, refusing to answer the door, and consuming enough antacids to neutralize a small chemical spill. The myth of Arthur's invincibility had shattered on Oakridge Drive, and the shockwaves were rattling every manicured patio from Gate A to Gate D. At precisely 8 a.m., the sleek black town car belonging to Henderson, the property manager, rolled down Oakridge Drive. But Henderson wasn't making his usual leisurely rounds to check on Lawn Heights. He was driving with the grim, hurried determination of a man rushing to a crime scene, which in bureaucratic terms it very well was. Henderson parked directly in front of Lot 42, hopped out, and marched up the grand stone steps of the Sterling residence. Before he could even lift his hand to knock, the massive mahogany front door swung open. Marcus Sterling stood there, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle navy tie. He looked less like a homeowner welcoming a guest and more like a CEO about to audit a failing subsidiary. "Morning, Henderson," Marcus said smoothly, stepping aside to let the manager in. "Right on time. Come on through to the study." The foyer of Lot 42 was breathtaking. High vaulted ceilings, polished hardwood floors that gleamed like wet glass, and walls adorned with striking, contemporary African American art that immediately signaled this house belonged to people of immense taste and culture. Through the back windows, a massive infinity pool sparkled against the backdrop of the rolling hills. Henderson swallowed hard, clutching a leather folder to his chest as he followed Marcus into a sunlit, mahogany-paneled home office. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson began, his voice trembling slightly. I got your text last night about the emergency board restructuring." "Sit down, Henderson," Marcus instructed, taking a seat behind a massive oak desk that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes fixed on the jittery property manager. "Let's not waste time. As the principal owner of Apex Horizon Holdings, I've spent the weekend reviewing the operational ledger of Westbridge Estates. And frankly, I am appalled." Henderson winced. "Appalled, sir? The community has a 98% collection rate on dues." "Dues are fine. The financial health is solid," Marcus interrupted, his tone cutting like a scalpel. "It's the governance that's rotten. Specifically, the weaponization of the Architectural Review Board by self-appointed tyrants like Arthur Pendleton." Henderson opened his mouth to defend Arthur, but thought better of it, remembering the sight of the chairman standing humiliated in his loafers on Saturday morning. "Mr. Pendleton has... Well, he's been here a long time," Henderson stammered. "He considers himself a traditionalist." "He's a bully with a clipboard," Marcus corrected flatly. "And effective today, his reign is over. Pull out your notepad, Henderson. Here is the new operational mandate for Westbridge Estates, starting immediately." Henderson frantically unzipped his leather folder and clicked his pen. "Item 1, Marcus said, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "Arthur Pendleton is formally stripped of his position as chairman of the Architectural Review Board, effective immediately. In fact, revoke his board seat entirely. He is no longer authorized to issue citations, warnings, or unsolicited advice to any resident of this community." "Stripped of his seat?" Henderson gasped. "Arthur has held that position for 12 years. The board will mutiny. Mrs. Higgins and the gardening committee will." "Let them mutiny," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a register that brooked no argument. "They can complain all they want over bridge club mimosas. If any member of the old guard gives you trouble, remind them who signs their vendor checks and who owns the land beneath their expensive feet. Arthur's petty little regime of harassment stops today." "Understood," Henderson muttered, scribbling furiously. "Item 1, Arthur is out. Item 2, Marcus continued seamlessly. We are going to audit every single fine, citation, and warning issued by the ARB over the last 3 years. If Arthur targeted minority homeowners, young families, or anyone who didn't fit his narrow demographic profile, which I suspect he did, every single one of those fines will be refunded with interest, courtesy of the HOA Reserve Fund, which Arthur will personally contribute to if our internal audit finds systemic abuse of power." Henderson looked up, his eyes wide. That's going to open a massive legal can of worms." "That's the sound of compliance, Henderson," Marcus replied coldly. Item 3, update the community bylaws regarding commercial and heavy-duty vehicles. A modern, high-end truck is no longer a violation, provided it's parked properly. And update the pet policy to reflect common sense instead of draconian paranoia." "Done," Henderson said, his hand cramping as he wrote. Is there anything else?" Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, calculated smile playing across his lips. "As a matter of fact, yes," Marcus said softly. "I want you to send an official neighborhood-wide memo to every resident of Westbridge Estates. Announce the restructuring of the board. Introduce myself and my family as the new principal stakeholders. And make sure you explicitly highlight the fact that the entire development is privately owned and operated by Apex Horizon Holdings." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "You want to make your identity public to the whole neighborhood? Most high-net-worth investors prefer anonymity." "Anonymity is great when you're hiding," Marcus said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "I'm not hiding. I want everyone in Westbridge to know exactly who owns the ground they walk on. Especially Arthur. By noon on Monday, The official HOA email blast hit the inboxes of every single resident in Westbridge Estates. Arthur Pendleton was sitting in his darkened study, nursing a cup of black tea and trying to figure out how to update his resume at age 58, when his phone buzzed violently on the mahogany desk. It was an email from Sterling and Associates Management. With trembling fingers, Arthur clicked it open. Subject: Important Community Update. Restructuring of the Architectural Review Board and Ownership Disclosure. Arthur's eyes scanned the text, his vision blurring with every paragraph. Notice of immediate removal of Arthur Pendleton from the Architectural Review Board due to gross administrative overreach and misconduct. Comprehensive audit of historical HOA fines. Formal introduction of the principal stakeholder of Apex Horizon Holdings, Marcus Sterling and family, residents of Lot 42. Arthur stared at the screen, the phone slipping from his limp fingers and clattering onto the hardwood floor. He wasn't just deposed. He had been erased. The entire machinery of petty suburban power he had wielded for a decade had been dismantled before lunch by a man he had tried to chase off the street with a condescending lecture about lawn care. Outside his front window, he heard the low, thunderous growl of a twin-turbo diesel engine. Arthur crept to the edge of the velvet drapes, parting them by a single millimeter. Across the street, the matte black Ford F-450 was backing smoothly out of the driveway of Lot 42. Marcus Sterling was behind the wheel, wearing sunglasses, looking entirely relaxed, heading out to conquer whatever boardroom he pleased. As the truck passed Arthur's house, Marcus didn't even turn his head. He didn't have to. He had already won the war without firing a single shot. Arthur let the curtain fall back into place, sank slowly into his leather armchair, and buried his face in his hands. The gold-plated cage of Westbridge Estates was still standing, but Arthur was no longer the master of the house. He was just another guest living at the mercy of the man across the street. Chapter 4. The Country Club Ambush. The ripple effect of the Monday morning memo tore through Westbridge Estates like a shockwave through tectonic plates. By Wednesday afternoon, the Country Club Lounge, traditionally the quiet domain of retired executives trading stock tips and sipping gin and tonics, had transformed into a buzzing war room of upper-middle-class panic. Arthur Pendleton sat at a corner table near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 18th green. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. His silver fox hair was slightly disheveled, and the heavy silk tie he wore felt like a noose tightening around his throat. Around him sat 3 of his oldest allies. Charles Sterling, no relation to Marcus, much to Charles's frequent, desperate clarification. A former real estate developer with a sunburned neck, Dr. Harold Vance, a retired orthopedic surgeon whose bedside manner was notoriously frostier than an iceberg, and Evelyn Higgins, the matriarch of the Garden Committee, whose face was currently set in a permanent expression of aristocratic horror. "It's a hostile takeover," Evelyn hissed, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin as if the very air in the room was contaminated. "That's what it is. A communiste style coup d'état." Removing Arthur without a General Assembly vote? Without a public hearing? I've lived in this neighborhood for 22 years, and I have never seen such blatant disregard for protocol. "It's worse than that, Evelyn," Charles muttered, leaning over the table, lowering his voice. "I looked into this Apex Horizon Holdings thing. You know who's backing them? Institutional capital out of New York, combined with private tech equity. They didn't just buy a house. They bought the underlying debt of the entire second-phase expansion of Westbridge. If they wanted to, they could rezone the common areas into commercial retail space by Friday afternoon." Dr. Vance grunted, swirling the ice in his scotch. "And who is this Marcus Sterling character anyway? Where did he even come from?" "Chicago," Henderson said. "Nobody comes from Chicago and buys out a multi-million-dollar development with pocket change unless they're running something illicit. Tech money? Venture capital? It doesn't make sense. People who look like, well, people like that don't just own developments like Westbridge." Arthur flinched. The casual, poisonous bigotry of his peers, bigotry he had happily participated in and nurtured for years, now felt like a jagged pill stuck in his throat. He knew exactly what Harold meant by people like that. He had thought the exact same thing while standing on his front porch on Saturday morning, looking at a black man in a t-shirt and jeans driving a truck that didn't fit his narrow, racist paradigm of suburban wealth. "He's not a criminal, Harold," Arthur said quietly, staring down into his lukewarm club soda. Evelyn blinked, dropping her fork against her salad plate with a sharp clink. Arthur, darling, whose side are you on? Are you defending this interloper? I saw his paperwork, Arthur muttered, a heavy, bitter exhaustion weighing down every word. I saw the state registrar seals. I saw the bank wire confirmations. He doesn't just own a stake, Evelyn. He owns the whole board. He owns Henderson. He owns this clubhouse. If he wanted to walk in here right now, point at this table, and evict us all for violating dress code, he could do it legally before we finished our drinks. The table fell into a stunned, horrified silence. For people whose entire identity was anchored to the illusion of absolute control, the realization that they were entirely at the mercy of a man they had insulted on day one was paralyzing. Well, Charles huffed, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of wounded machismo, we aren't just going to roll over. We're property owners. We have deed covenants. We can mount a legal challenge. We can organize a petition, withhold our quarterly HOA dues into an escrow account, and force him to negotiate. Before Arthur could point out the absolute suicide of withholding funds from a man who literally owned the escrow bank, the heavy double doors of the country club lounge swung open. The ambient chatter of the room died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence swept over the lounge as three figures walked through the entrance. It was Marcus Sterling, flanked by two men in sharp, charcoal suits who looked like they moonlighted as Secret Service agents. Marcus wasn't wearing his golf clothes or his casual t-shirt. He wore a bespoke navy suit that fit him like a tailored blade, a crisp blue shirt, and a silk tie that probably cost more than Arthur's monthly grocery bill. He wore aviator sunglasses indoors, taking them off slowly as his dark, calculating gaze swept across the room. Behind him walked Maya Sterling, dressed in a stunning cream-colored blazer and designer trousers, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. She didn't look like a newcomer seeking acceptance. She looked like an incoming CEO performing a routine inspection of a failing acquisition. The entire room stared. Evelyn Higgins clutched her pearls so hard her knuckles turned white. Charles Vance instinctively sat up straight, his face flushing red. Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked directly toward Arthur's corner table, his polished leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The two suited men stopped 10 paces back, acting as an unyielding human wall that blocked anyone from approaching or interfering. Arthur froze, his blood running ice cold. He half expected Marcus to pull out a megaphone, announce his eviction to the entire club, and throw him out into the parking lot. Marcus stopped at the edge of the table, looking down at the four terrified pillars of Westbridge society. A slow, razor-sharp smile touched his lips. "Enjoying lunch, Arthur?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I see you've brought your advisory council together. Figuring out a legal strategy, are we? Withholding dues into an escrow account? Trying to organize a neighborhood mutiny?" Charles gasped, his eyes darting toward Marcus in absolute terror. How could he possibly know what we were just talking about? Mr. Sterling, Charles stammered, half rising from his chair before thinking better of it and sinking back down. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We were merely discussing community landscaping standards." "Landscaping standards," Marcus repeated, letting out a short, cold chuckle. He pulled out a chair uninvited, turned it around, and sat down backwards, resting his forearms on the backrest, looking directly at Arthur. Arthur couldn't look him in the eye. He stared fixedly at the silver buttons on Marcus's cuff. "Let's clear something up right now," Marcus said, his voice dropping into that quiet, commanding register that commanded total obedience. "You can hire every real estate attorney in the state of Georgia. You can pool your retirement funds, draft petitions, and whisper in corners all you want. But every single deed in Westbridge Estates contains a master clause granting the primary holding company absolute administrative discretion over community governance. In plain English, you signed away your right to sue the HOA 30 years ago when you bought your first lots." He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto Arthur's trembling form. "You built a little kingdom here, Arthur. A nice, safe, gated little echo chamber, where you could pretend you were a king because you had the power to fine someone for leaving a trash can out too long. You weaponized the rules to keep out anyone who didn't look like you or think like you. convincing yourself that your petty tyranny was preserving property values. Maya walked up beside her husband, placing a hand on the back of his chair, looking down at Evelyn and Charles with clinical detachment. And now, Maya added smoothly, the bill has come due. You're not kings, gentlemen. You're tenants in a world that outgrew your prejudices 10 years ago. What do you want from us? Arthur finally whispered, his voice cracking, all the fight completely drained out of him. Do you want us to leave? Do you want to force us out of our homes? Marcus stared at Arthur for a long, heavy beat. The silence in the country club was so absolute that the hum of the overhead refrigerator sounded like a jet engine. Leave, Marcus said softly. No, Arthur. That would be too easy. You're going to stay right here. You're going to pay your dues on time. You're going to wave hello to my wife when she checks the mail. And every single day, when you walk out onto your heated marble porch, you're going to look across the street at my house. And you're going to remember that the entire foundation of your precious little world belongs to a black man you tried to chase off the grass with a lecture about leashes. Marcus stood up, smoothing his jacket. He looked around the terrified room, nodding politely to Evelyn, who looked like she might actually faint. Have a wonderful afternoon, neighbors, Marcus said, turning on his heel. Try not to break any rules. I'd hate to have to fine you.